A station calling hello. The frequency is in use. Roger, roger. Who was the station saying hello?
Apparently he didn't know you were in there.
Can you imagine that? He must not have his antenna hooked up, I would think.
That or either his volume is not turned up.
Roger, roger. I would think his antenna wasn't hooked up.
Anyway, good afternoon, W4DII.
Good afternoon, sir. What's the call again?
W4DII.
W4DII. Roger, roger. What's the name?
Dennis.
A little quick there. Try one more time.
I guess I'm catching your blocks. I guess I might be quick on it. Yeah, it's Dennis.
Roger, roger, Dennis. Whereabouts are you, sir?
I'm in southeast Georgia, about a mile inland from Jekyll Island.
Oh, roger. Beautiful signal. What kind of signal are you catching on us?
Oh, you got beautiful audio, no problem at all. Nice, strong signal, 9, bumping a 10. Sounds really good.
Roger, roger. You have excellent signal also. What radio are you running?
Actually, the same thing as the other gentleman, a Pro 3, ICOM 76 Pro 3.
Doing you a great job. What kind of antenna?
A dipole.
Roger. Just a straight horizontal dipole?
Actually, it's a little bit of an invert, not much. It's not exactly a flat top, not exactly an inverted V. It's flat, it's greater than 120 degrees.
Roger, roger. Now, let me guesstimate. It's running east and west, roger?
Absolutely.
Roger, roger. I would think so with the signal you're giving me.
Actually, this is an 80-meter dipole, but it tunes perfectly here on 40.
Roger. Now, you're running antenna tuner?
Yes, I am. Dentron MT3008.
Now, is that fully automatic? You just hit a button and it does it?
No, I've got mine by the numbers. It's the old one, 3008. It's got the dual meter, but I've done some work on the inside and modified it a little bit, but it'll tune the salted string, I believe.
Roger, roger. Some of those guys will do a 6 standing wave. I mean, I guess some of them were better than that, I was talking to this one guy up in Michigan, I think, during the winter, and he had just put up his new dipole, and unfortunately the rope that he used was a favorite from the local squirrel family, and they did proceed to eat his rope in half of his new dipole, and it was wound up about 2 foot under snow. And after he did a little SWR tuning, I was talking to him. He was giving me about an 8, Roger.
Yeah, sounds like he's got it working again then.
Well, yeah, for 2 foot under snow, it was amazing. I wouldn't have thought that antenna would have gotten out at all.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I have a MFJ 289C, and I am, I love that. I managed to get it to where I'm only using it on 80 meters, because 80 meters is so broad that I want to, I don't want to hang out too much SWR at either end. So I do use it on 80, but I go to bypass on the other bands, and I pick up a 6-position rotary switch. So I have three inverted V's, a loop antenna, a 5/8, and a quarter wave, all tied to that rotary. Roger.
All right, that's good. I just select them right there. As long as you don't have port-to-port bleed over, you're doing good.
Oh, Roger, no problem at all. It's just beautiful, rather than constantly having to tune the antenna tuner. And that's why I went to great lengths to, I've got my 3 inverted V's for 15, 20, and 40 meters. And I have got those down to about a 1.01 to 1. So no tuner needed there. And then I'm on the 10-meter side. I'm using my loop antenna, my 5/8, and the quarter wave, and those are all under 1.3. So no antenna tuner needed for that, Roger.
Oh, definitely. No issues there. That's a good deal there.
So it makes it really nice. I just couldn't imagine life having to use the antenna tuner every time I changed bands. And this way I have the 289C pretty much parked on the center frequency of 80 meters, 3900, because I'm not an extra, I'm just a general. So my frequency bandpass on 80 is 38 to 4. and so it's not really that large, but you know, out to the edges, I'm catching about a 1.3 and 1.4, and so I do want to do a little touch-up. You know, the thing is, you seldom ever get out to the edges. I mean, usually you're well within you know, the edge frequencies. Roger?
Hey, I agree with you. Some like a tuner, some don't. I agree with that. Then an automatic tuner would be the way to go, of course, but you know, those get quite pricey as far as that goes. But anyway, a resonant antenna's hard to beat them, sure is. But I like a tuner just in case you are on a band this large and you can move around without any SWR issue.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this MFJ 289C is, you know, it's rated for 3 kW. Probably on a wet day it might do 1500, and it had some issues when I first got it, but my Elmer did give it to me, so you know, I love it. The MFJ at that time was doing a thing called drive-by soldering, and that is, if the coil came within the proximity of a connection, they would just solder the two together there without actually physically attaching the connection. They would just do a drive-by solder. And the problem is that sometimes those antenna tuners get into great difficulties of position as far as tuning the SWR. Like if you were trying to run 40 meters on an 80 meter antenna, you might have a little heating going on in there, and you could tell that that had occurred because when you opened up the SWR box, you would see some of those joints that were kind of a dull, you know, sunken look, you know, as if you might look underneath a little bit further, you would see solder droppings. So I did go back and modify some of that stuff to more reflect a definite run from one place to the other, as opposed to just soldering it as it passed by. Roger?
I know exactly what you're talking about. That's happened to a lot of the boards in a lot of different places other than just yours, or that particular one. But yeah, always, I think it's a very prudent point, is go in and check those joints, because it could be a big problem.
Oh, Roger, Roger. And I never realized just how much heating might occur if you're, again, trying to run a 40 meters on an 80 meter antenna. You are towards the end of the coil there, and so I did find that there was quite a bit of heating going on there. But I did have, it was about a loop and a half that I had in excess of, well, I had about 3 loops to spare, so I took about a loop or so to go back and actually make a good physical connection to the capacitor there, as opposed to just a drive-by. Roger?
Yeah, also, too, this one's not exactly stock, this tuner. It has a 10K continuous 4-to-1 in it, and I've gone in and beefed up several of the cables and the wiring, so it'll take whatever I put in. I've never gotten heat out of it. I've run it, opened her up, checked it, and never get the first bit of warmth out of anything or anywhere.
Oh, Roger, yeah, that's the way it should be. And this also had some pits on the coil, and some of those pits were in you know, kind of close proximity to each other, and you would have if you tuned as you were operating, if you tuned through those pits, you would definitely have a little bounce there of the signal. So I did sandpaper those just a little bit. And the other thing somebody mentioned was that you could probably take that coil and turn it around, and then you would be using an area that probably hadn't been used before, might be virgin territory, you know, and so rather than going crazy with trying to get rid of the pits, just turn the coil around and use the other end. Roger?
Well, take a look. Now, if you're talking about a roller inductor coil, you'll notice that it's wide space and it tapers. So, see, you might want to take a rethink on that instead of turning it around. So you got to look at the loading of that coil and the proximity of each coil to each other. Notice they're not exactly equal spacing.
Roger, Roger. Now, I don't know. On this 289C, as I recall, it was equal spacing from one end to the other. And, you know, it did have a tracker that ran down the coil, you know, and even if the coil spacing might be different, that tracker is going to follow the coil. Roger, Roger?
Yeah, I understand where you're going, yeah. But just, a little food for thought, something to think about.
Roger. Well, it would be probably my last resort as to, actually getting in there and reversing that coil. It would make a lot more sense to me. I never really had that problem of bounce, too much. It was, fairly stable, except, after I made the modifications to the solder joints. And there was one time I had an arc from the coil to the chassis, probably about in the middle of the coil to the chassis. And once you get an arc burn, that arc burn will be there forever, and it will always be a constant problem for arcing again if it arcs once. And so I did put a plastic CD cover. I loosened the coil and put a plastic CD cover under the coil, and that isolates and insulates the coil winding from possibly arcing to the chassis, Roger.
Very good. Pretty quick move.
Roger, did real well, and so I've never had that problem before or after that, Roger.
Sounds like you definitely got the fix worked out.
Roger, I'm just glad that that plastic was as good as it was. I did look closely, and the way it arced was there was a coil support. It was, I don't think it was a screw thing. It was just a physical support in the middle. It was a piece of plastic that ran from the coil area down to the chassis that would keep the coil at X number of centimeters above the frame. And as I looked at it, I could see an carbon arc burn down that plastic. So that's when I said, no, that's just waiting to happen again. So I did that CD cover, and never a problem after that.
Yeah, that carbon tracing can be a booger too, because you know how it'll develop and it'll drive you nuts.
Oh, right. Once you get a carbon burn, you'll have to actually dig it out. You'd have to get in there and physically get rid of that carbon. Otherwise, it's a trail right to disaster.
Well, the other thing, too, is just go ahead and replace the pool. Or if you have a variable roller and ductile, whatever it's off of, just replace it.
Roger. Well, I just grabbed what was at hand, and I had a CD case, and it would fit underneath there without any, undue effort. So I said, well, close enough.
All it needs to do is work.
That's it. And I haven't had a moment's trouble after that at all. Of course, I haven't been trying to run 40 meters on an 80-meter antenna.
Well, I've been doing this particular thing like this for probably, I guess, around 30 years or so. But actually, to give you a little background, I am or was Dino's Tower Service. Been doing this for many years, installing towers and antennas and building them. And I've learned that, I've got this one cut. It doesn't give me any issue, 40 or 80.
Oh, your dipole is 40 or 80?
Yeah, it's an 80-meter dipole. I play it here on 40, but I don't get any heating in either place.
Oh, roger that. Well, my problem was initially my 80-meter dipole was a sloper that went from about 80 foot on the high side out of a tree down to about 18 feet on the low side to a power pole. And the thing that it never would tune correctly. I never could really get that SWR down. I could find the quote dip, but I couldn't get it lower than maybe a 3 or 2, and so that's when I started using the antenna tuner on it. But through operator error, I did about a year ago lose my top position in that tree. It's a long story, but it was operator error, and it was my stupidity that I did lose that position. And that position had been put there by a good friend of mine that put it up there. Let's see, what did he use? I forget, but it was he managed to make it there, and it was just it was like Babe Ruth. You pointed to a limb and said, "That's where it is, 80 foot up on a tree," and he proceeded to put it there exactly where it should have been. And so it served its purpose well, it just never could really tune it. And then I went through operator error, and I won't say how that happened, but I was using tie wraps, and I was doing a bunch of tuning, and I wasn't really tightening the tie wraps. And about 3 of them slipped, and I lost the whole thing down from the top. So as a makeshift measure, I went to the about the second limb on that tree, which was about 25 feet or so. And that was a big come down from 80 feet to 25 feet, I thought. But lo and behold, after I was running that way, which made the dipole more horizontal than a sloper, much it was a horizontal polarization exactly, all of a sudden, wow, my dip was down to a 1.2 without tuning. I mean, just the same antenna, just running more horizontal than the sloper. 1.2, almost perfect 3.9 frequency. So I couldn't believe it. So that is the difference between a sloper tuning and the dipole, horizontal dipole antenna tuning, because both sides of that dipole want to be balanced. And that balance is a balance to ground. And when you have the sloper, the one end is much less attuned to the same as the other. So when you bring them both horizontal, then they coincide with each other, and the SWR drops, and so does the obviously the dip, Roger.
Yeah, you're getting the angle right. Like for instance, if you take a regular dipole, you want to tune it, you can tune it and set the impedance by merely opening and closing the legs of the dipole.
Oh, roger that, roger that. And the thing is also, I don't use balance. I just use the choke. So the thing is, you got to be sure that you get that choke in there before you start doing small SWR adjustments, because that choke in line will affect the SWR, particularly when you're right down to that 1.1 area.
Oh yeah, you want to tune it, cut it to length, use your analyzer, that's what you use, that's what I use. I'm on number 9, by the way, of those analyzers. But they work real well.
Roger that, roger that. Well, it's all, it's all interesting and everything, and the more you work with it, the more you develop a feel for the tuning. Now on those inverted V's, I use a tuning method of SWR adjustments on the ground side and frequency adjustments on the high side, and I go back and forth and walk that down. Those 3 inverted V's are running 1.01 to 1, Roger.
That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, and so I think there's not much that can beat a resonant wire antenna as far as radiation efficiency.
You're looking at a 0 gain, 0 loss antenna. It doesn't show any either way, but it's hard to beat. When a resonant antenna, you can't get around it.
Oh, roger that. Now, and antenna tuners are just a way to match a good radio to a poor antenna system, just to keep the radio happy, but it doesn't really affect the efficiency of the antenna at all.
No, not really. But then again, the length you cut it, that's what's going to come into play. What resonant length are you at up there? That's valid.
Roger. Now, my tuning method of doing the SWR on the negative side and the on frequency on the high side, after it was all said and done and the smoke cleared, I looked up, and it did seem to me that the positive side, the high side of the inverted V, might have been just a little bit, maybe 10 or 15% longer than the negative side, but I don't know. But I got a nice 1.01 dip at the center frequency, like on this one, 7237. I'm running about a 1.01 to 1, so I can't argue that, Roger.
Yeah, it looks good in the numbers, but here's the thing you're not taking a look at, and that's your pattern. Anytime both sides are not equal, you are fooling with the pattern of your antenna. Easy neck your pattern and see what happens on your computer.
Roger that. Well, all I know is that I'm good from Montreal to Miami and from New York to New Mexico, so it seems to be fairly non-discriminatory on area, Roger.
Yeah, it could be. Like I say, just for food for thought, just run it through the EasyNet program, set it up and run it through. But you'll see it does alter the pattern. That's why you want to keep both ends equal length, and also whatever on a dipole, whatever you've got the right side height above ground, the left side needs to be equal above ground, even if it's on a sloping hill.
Roger. Well, I'm doing most of my my three inverted V's at pretty much the same height. I converted some of my middle guy wires to inverted V's just because of space requirements. So they're all at vertically rather, about the same height. And they all exhibit pretty much the same slope as far as the inverted part of it. So, you know, it's all working out, and seems to be, like in this one here, is, you know, fairly non-directional. So, gosh, what more could I ask for?
Not a whole lot. You're playing well. I mean, no problem. I haven't heard you on the other bands, but this one right here, I mean, there's been a couple of lulls, but you've never dropped more than an S unit or so.
Roger. I'm copying you now at 9 dB, or they're so above my noise level. So you've been up all the time. I can't really give you an actual S meter reading because I'm not running my radio that way. It is, you know, I have the RF gain turned down to just above my AGC compression, and so, you know, obviously the meter it's not going to give me an accurate reading in that way, Roger.
Oh, well, the key to the whole thing is communication. As long as you can hear me and I can hear you, doesn't matter what the meter says, communication is made.
Oh, that's a Roger. That is a Roger. And, you know, that's the whole thing also that, you know, folks just starting out in radio don't seem to understand is that first about resonant antennas. They want to just string out a piece of wire, use the auto tuner in the radio, or, you know, an outboard antenna tuner and call that close enough. And then, you know, they don't necessarily consult their ALC reading, so you know, and they change mics without going back and checking their ALC to be sure that they're in the mid scale at least, or maybe a 2/3 scale on their ALC, and mic equalization has a lot to do with, you know, being able to communicate legibly. That's the thing, you know. And I found a little top-end EQ and a little bottom roll. I use close mic proximity, and so I have a bass buildup, and so you have to roll that out. Otherwise, you sound like Mr. Bassman there. So there's a lot of things that, you know, the guy coming in just from the cold into amateur radio may not understand. And that's why, you know, the position of Elmer's to be able to help these people out is very important.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing you touched on there, too, which none of them do anymore, not old school like we used to be, where you had to actually draw everything and put it out. But the bottom line is these guys, they read a book and it's multiple choice and that's it. I think one requirement for a new ham, he should know the ARRL antenna book front to back.
Yeah, Roger. Well, I mean, but, you know, it's, again, how much can you expect the average person to juggle trying to get into a hobby? Whereas, you know, if we get them in, then we have a chance to, you know, to educate them as to, you know, what they need to know. You know, it's like you can run a station at 100 watts or 90 watts and unprocessed audio. But you should not be surprised when your signal is less than perfect at 300 or 400 miles away. So if one gets serious about being able to communicate on a regular basis, you know, above noise level, then it's going to necessitate kicking up the power a little bit, doing a little work on your EQ, and making sure that your ALC is in shape, and possibly, you know, without audio processing, the average percent of peak modulation is about 30%. So they might want to consider maybe kicking in about maybe a 3 out of 10 on their compressor, about a 3 out of 10 or a 30 out of 100, just to barely engage the compressor a little bit, just to start fattening up that dynamic range. Roger?
Sorry, on the phone. Be right back. W4DII.
And this is Kilo Charlie 9 Victor Kilo Victor with the Friday morning Qso-Vlog. We are on the air now recording our Qso-Vlog. If you have a station you want to check out, give us a call. We'll put you in line and get a recording on you and then post it up on YouTube in the next couple of days. And if you go to YouTube and do a call letter search for Kilo Charlie 9 Victor Kilo Victor, that will open up the Qso-Vlog page, and on that page you'll find a Qso marked My Group Air Check, and the date is 10/5/18, and the frequency is 7189. This is KC9VKV.